Chag Sameach, everybody. So I scheduled this Just Chatting stream, and our dear friend Yoav decided to join. Um, so, and he wants to talk about the creation story and science, which is one of my favorite topics. So, what are we going to talk about? Omphalos, Genesis 1, Darwinism. What are we going to be talking about?
The point, we have two creation stories. We have the creation story in Genesis, and we have the creation story of the science. And I would ask you, say that you didn't have Genesis.
Yeah.
Would you consider the creation story from the science sufficient?
So there's so much to say here.
Good. So we're only beginning.
Let's start with Aristotle's four causes. Right. So you have let me actually pull this up so that I don't get it wrong. So you have the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause. Okay? And Wikipedia gives us this beautiful image to help us understand these various causes. Let me pull this up. So this is the image they have. So you have a dining room table, right? And the question is, what is the cause of this dining room table, right? So there's the material cause, which is what's it made out of, right? So it's made out of wood. That's the material cause of it. There's the formal cause, which is what is the shape that makes it look like a table, right? That's the form of it, is the form of a table. There's the efficient cause, which is how did this table come to be here? Somebody actually made this table, right? And then there's the final cause, which is, well, why do I have a dining table, right? Because I want to sit and eat at this table, right? Now, what's happened is that unfortunately, in the West, when we ask why, we have started only focusing on the efficient cause. When we say what is the cause of something, we think efficient cause, right? And when we talk about the science, we may talk about the material cause of something, we may talk about the efficient cause of something. But the fact is, and my dear friend Sam Titteman says, make final cause great again, right? That really what matters the most is actually final cause, telos. And what science can definitely not give you, and this is one of the things that people who don't understand much about science cannot really fathom the difference, is science can't give you a final cause, can't give you meaning, can't give you why am I here. Okay, and in fact, what happens is when we focus on the material and efficient cause, is it too many people, and I would say they make a mistake when they do this, start discounting the importance of even the possibility of a final cause, that we are here for a reason, that there's something here. So without revelation, would science be able to give us, I mean, formal cause? That becomes a question of nominalism, right? And I'm a post-nominalist. I would like to be a pre-nominalist, but that's not an option, because we live in in a world where nominalism has actually happened. So you can only be a nominalist or a post-nominalist. You can't be a pre-nominalist. Hear that, ortho bros? You cannot be a pre-nominalist. But you to talk about the science, being able to talk about telos, being able to talk about formal cause, it can't talk about formal cause. It has no capacity to talk about formal cause. It is not within the realm of science to talk about formal cause and final cause. Sorry.
So to summarize, you say there are 4 kinds of causes. And my question now becomes, do you think the science gives complete enough answer to any of the 4?
Complete enough? Complete enough. I don't think it's possible for science to talk seriously about complete enough knowledge. What does that even mean? Right?
It means that we leave you still wondering and still lacking. And it's about, I'm asking you personally, do you think that with any one of the causes, you say, okay, I've heard the answer, it's a good answer, I'm still wondering, I still would like to, do you feel okay, there is a gap, there is always a gap. And you said to me once that the gap is diminishing. In time, science is working on the project, and the gap is diminishing. Do you think, as a matter of principle, is the gap finite and possibly can be filled possibly sometime in the future, or do you think the gap is fundamental and infinite, and no matter how much you work and fill it up, it will not get filled for any of the 4 causes?
Okay, so let's just to give more thing to the discussion we were having. You said you believe in the God of the gaps, and what that concept, God of the gaps, is. So the God of the gaps is actually a pejorative term that theists have used against the atheist idea that the concept of God is there to explain things that we don't yet understand. And as we come to understand things better, the gaps shrink, and the role of God in the world shrinks. In that sense, as we gain knowledge, in the sense that, well, okay, the first question becomes, is there anything infinite, right? So this idea of the infinite is a concept, but I can't give you an example of something that is actually infinite, because everything we can talk about is finite, right? what there definitely is things which are larger than what I can consider or think about or contain in my knowledge, right?
Okay, I want to push back against that. I think there are two cases in which we talk about the infinite.
Okay.
First is the countable infinity. And then if you're careful enough, we're talking it's a process. It's not a number, it's a process. You can imagine the process of counting, and you say, okay, this counting in principle doesn't stop, and therefore the process of counting represents an infinity. And that is, it's robust. There's a lot of mathematics that can be built up on that.
Sure.
The other infinity that we know is the infinity of the point on a line. We talk about it a lot. I mean, it's underlining all of physics. But yes, we don't understand any of it.
And you end up with Zeno's paradox.
Yes.
And that's also kind of the problem with the countable infinity, which you're right, in human conception, right? I can say, well, I can just keep on counting. Or when you talk about like dividing 1 by 3, right? There appears to be something infinite there. But in practice, right? So Zeno's paradox is, if I want to walk from here to that door over there, right? In order to walk from here to that door, I have to walk through the point which is halfway between here and there, right? And in order to get to the point halfway, I have to walk through the point that is halfway between this and the halfway. And you can keep on going until there's an infinite number of points between me and that door. So how do I actually get to that door if I have to take an infinite number of steps, right? And the fact is, I do walk. So, like, in a sense, I'm negating your infinite points on a plane. It's obviously finite enough that I can walk from here to there, right?
Okay, so the problem is, and I think I'm getting a bit out of the subject I wanted to discuss, is that the concept of the real number, of the uncountable infinity, is underlying physics, even to the point of underlying simple motion. But we don't really understand it. That is the point. But I'm want to go back to the story of creation.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a famous conversation with Richard Dawkins, in which he was asked about the creation of the world according to science, or according to physics. The start, the beginning of the universe according to physics. And his position was as follows: he doesn't understand it. He doesn't even hope to understand it. But there is a certain class of priests that he calls physicists. They understand it. They assure him that they understand it, and they're talking a language of mathematics that he cannot comprehend, but he's trusting them blindly. And therefore, his position, yes, there is a reliable story of the creation of the world. I do not understand it, but it's enough if the priest understands it. Very Catholic of him. And my position is that in my profession, I'm an engineer. And I make it my business to understand the physics. And I'm getting paid for it. I listen to what they say. I can read their mathematics. I cannot write it, but I can read it to a rudimentary level, and I turn it into gadgets, and I sell the gadgets for money. That's what I do for a living. So when the physicists are talking about the creation of the world, I understand fully what they say.
Okay.
And the question that Richard Dawkins could not understand is how come the world has a beginning? How come you can get something out of nothing? And the answer to that is that the world bends at that point. If you're on a skateboard in a special skateboard playground, you're starting your journey on a horizontal plane, and you're moving fast, and then the wall starts curving up, so your speed horizontally diminishes. You keep your speed, but you don't make as much progress. And if the wall is infinitely tall, you can go on your skateboard with the same velocity. You will never get to the end of the world. So that's the answer, that the world curves into infinity at that point. Still, when I examine the story on its own, it's I and many other people that find it full of gaps. And then the question is, will there be substantial progress? I mean, progress there will be all the time. Will there be any substantial progress that will say, okay, I know I don't know all the details. Like, consider the start of life. Let's say that we adopt the little warm pool, the first model of the beginning of life that Darwin joyfully, by jest, put down in a letter. Say that we know for sure, we had all the physics on the chemistry in place, and we know that life started in a little warm pool some billions of years ago. Well, we don't know which pool. We don't know the exact geographic location of the pool. We don't know the exact dimensions of the pool. We don't know the exact shape of the pool. Happy Sukkot, everybody. But it's immaterial. We have solved the question of the start of life sufficiently well. Unfortunately, the little warm pool model is false. I mean, no question about it. And other models are incomplete. And the question is that incompleteness
intrinsic?
Sorry?
Intrinsic?
Intrinsic and fundamentally unfeelable. My gut feeling, now we're getting to a matter of a religious belief now. I cannot prove anything now from that point.
Yeah.
My religious belief is that it is fundamentally unfeelable.
First, let me ask you, have you looked into Eric Weinstein's geometric unity?
Am I supposed to understand what you're saying?
Yeah, Eric Weinstein has a theory of everything. And yes. I ask everybody who claims to know anything about physics if they've looked into it. I am not at that level.
Okay. If he had claimed that this solves the question of the beginning of the world, it would be worthwhile everybody to start studying it. But that's not his claim.
I don't know enough about his claim to say either way. I can say from what I have tried to understand of it that it does claim something fundamental about the structure of the universe. Um, but okay, um, that was just an aside. Um, when so for me, what answers that question is I know that I have a finite capacity to understand myself. Now, however much information, and this really does go back to what you said with Dawkins and being Catholic, right? Is I know that I have a finite capacity to understand things, and I have to outsource my cognition to people that I can trust. And there are things which, frankly, I am not that interested in trying to understand. And so functionally, there will always be gaps in my knowledge that have to be um, filled with faith. And this is a Jewish concept of faith, not a Protestant concept of faith. Um, because what is faith? What is emunah? Ani ma'amin, right? So the psalm says lahagid baboker chastecha ve'emunatcha baleilot, to proclaim during the day your loving kindness and your faithfulness at night. And so in our prayers, when we say Shema in the morning, it ends with Ani Kechem Emet, and in the morning we conclude Emet v'Yatziv, and in the evenings we conclude Emet v'Emunah. Why? Because you know when you can see, when there's light. You have emunah when you can't see, when it's dark. Emunah is an extension of what we have seen, what we do know, into the realms where we cannot see. And so extending our knowledge beyond that which we have been able to observe, actually, it's partially I'm not just talking to Yoav, young God. If I was only talking to Yoav, this would be a much shorter conversation, and we wouldn't be broadcasting it. Um, when we talk about science, right? So there's observational science, right? A scientist that goes to Madagascar and sees what's there is doing science, just writing down, taking pictures, right? Cataloging. That's science. And then there's a step beyond that, which is trying to understand causation, right? Trying to understand if I do this to this, that will happen, right? And then there's interpolation, right? Which is I have observed this, I have observed that, and between these two things, I can fill out the information, right? And then there's extrapolation, which is I can take from what I know and extrapolate backwards or forwards beyond any observation that I've had. Now, I have to say, any extrapolation is by definition emunah. It's an act of faith, right? Because anything could have happened before or after it, and it's not possible to actually know if it's true or not. And this is actually one of the ways that Orthodox Jewish believers, right? One of the ways that we understand the religious narrative to be outside of the empirical scientific narrative, right, is we will say nishtana hateva. There was a change in fundamental physics, right? So by the flood, most Orthodox Jews will say there was a fundamental change in the physics of the world, right? And so I can't extrapolate beyond that point given our scientific understanding.
Okay, just a comment, because a comment about a comment. William Branch said, unified field theory is only funded for building the Omega bomb. I don't know what the Omega bomb is or what unified field theory is, but that's my point. If they build the Omega bomb, then I believe in the unified field theory. If for, let's say, half a century, they don't manage to build even the first prototype of the Omega bomb, then I don't trust the unified field theory.
Well, I mean, that goes back to what you were saying about the warm pool where life began, right? Like
I'm saying that my yardstick for the truthfulness of a scientific claim is the gizmos that you can build out of it.
Yeah, if you could actually show me how I can take inanimate matter and make it living matter, then I'll believe you that you understand how to make how inanimate matter became living. Until you do, and honestly, I mean, we're talking about questions of epistemology here, right? How can we know? What do we know? What is the level of confidence we have in what we know? And at the risk of being repetitive, I will point to Halakhic Man Note 4 once more, where he says there's an antinomic structure to a human being trying to understand his world, and there fundamentally the question you ask about is it possible for the gaps to be filled in? It's not possible for the gaps to be filled in for me as a human being. The amount of information is greater than my capacity to have it. What's with the Israeli contingent here? Chag Sameach?
Chag Sameach. I guess that's the Israeli contingent. We have a holiday.
Yeah. Are you up at the Kinneret again?
I am.
Yoav and I were just talking about the Kinneret before we came on.
I was wondering where all the Israelis are, because there are 10 millions of us in a very small country, and you cannot go much to the north, and and you cannot go much abroad because the flights are very expensive at the moment. I just wondered where everybody is.
I think everyone's at home, to be honest. Everyone's just watching the news, even though today was the Kinneret got some action today. Some alarms, some rockets, but I don't know. I don't mean to derail the conversation. What were you guys talking about?
We were talking about the God of the Gaps.
The God of the Gaps.
And Yoav wants to know, is it possible that the gaps would ever be completely filled?
Filled with his knowledge, filled with our knowledge, like as in we can now understand. We're all I don't know. I don't think human comprehension is that developed.
Our good friend Kalanimus Eliezer is speaking in Yiddish, and I don't understand what he's saying. What's Chol HaMoed Halten?
What is Halton?
I'm sorry, Kalanimus, you're speaking in Yiddish. It's all Yiddish to us.
Yeah, yo, what's bring up this question?
Historically, is the awful accusation that has been hurled at me that I was an atheist. And I was trying to think, in what way am I not an atheist? And the way in which I am not an atheist is my strong belief that the gaps will never be filled, that the gaps are fundamental and infinite. And therefore, the God of the gap is fundamental and infinite. And that's the God I believe in, because the gaps are there. I cannot deny their existence. They're just there.
I would say the difference is ultimately, like, I could be wrong about this, but to me that sounds like more like the philosopher God. And then one of those gaps to fill is, can you identify him as we say in Hebrew, Kemisha Amar Ve'ayah Ha'olam? Right? Is this a God that is just there, or is this a God that speaks? Is there revelation?
Well,
I don't know if that's. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Jacob.
So, I mean, I usually talk about this in the context of an Arenic God versus an agentic God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is impossible for an intelligent human being to deny the concept of an Arenic God. Classical theism, right? The idea that of the prime mover, the idea of, and the way Yoav is explaining the God of the gaps. I don't think an intelligent person can deny that form of theism, the Arenic God. Now, I am very glad for people to start with the Arenic God. But ultimately, the Jewish God is, and this is Kaufman, I forget, Israel Kaufman? Yechezkel Kaufman. The ultimate Hebrew idea is that the Arenic God and the agentic God, Ani Havaya Elokechem, right, is crash into each other. And it is an amazing and strange thing to believe in the agentic God, who is also the same as the Arenic God. And so
Right.
I won't say that somebody who believes in an Arenic God is an atheist sometimes, and other times, I mean, the accusation was hurled at you in the context of let's talk about our dear friend Zionism, right? the question becomes.
Before you label him Zionistic or before you label him an atheist, how about just go back to the Talmud and say all who refute, who deny idol worship are called a Jew, and that's good.
That's beautiful. But the question becomes, I think all three of us believe that the fact that two of you are in Eretz HaKodesh, right? The holy land of our peoples, that there was an agency in the world which causes that to be.
Okay,
and that's very different from the God of the gaps.
okay. I want. I mean, you said God spoke the word into existence. Now, what is speaking in this context? There was no sound waves in the vacuum.
No, intentional. So we shouldn't go. We shouldn't go scientific on it, Yoav.
No. I'm.
Yeah.
Sorry. If you're talking to me, you have to. The handle to me is a scientific one. You have to approach me. Chanoch lanar al pi darko.
No, so you misunderstood me. We could definitely have that conversation. My point was when I said that point, Mishamar Vaya Olam, I'm not talking about sound waves, or I'm not talking about.
Exactly what I wanted to say. Let me just say it because I haven't said it yet.
Sorry.
Speaking is the contributing information. What you add to the world by speaking, you add information. Okay? And that's exactly the long dimension of the infinite gap. Because you can all the science is there, the physics is there, the chemistry is there. There are something that is called the black chimney and the bottom of the ocean. And there is a giant battery that is called Earth that is providing the energy. And it is splitting into little batteries and little cells in the chambers of the black chimney. Everything is there ready, except the information. If you have the black chimney in place on Earth, and you want to create life, the only thing that you need to add is the information. But there's no way you can add the information scientifically.
Without, right, I'm saying without intentionality.
That's the riddle. Can information be created out of nothing without international? That's exactly the riddle.
Well, hold on.
No doubt you need the information.
But I hate to wander into areas that I know you know a lot better than I do, Yoav. But wasn't the Pele of the double slit experiment that information changes the reality of science?
You're not the only one that doesn't understand what's happening there.
Can I just confirm? Are we talking about right now like the superposition and the fact that there's like an observation?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
but while that sounds very wooey, I know, like scientifically speaking, like even there, you have to take into consideration photons and light, and like they themselves are creating the
I tread very lightly here, which, as you know, I'm not a person who treads lightly anyway. I know nothing.
Nobody does. Nobody does. There's nobody to ask.
I would because like you said, obviously this is a hefty riddle, right? One that's been going on for a while. I would say as we get closer to the book of Genesis, as we are completing our cycle, praise the Lord, we will start again. And I believe last year I spoke about a little how it is fascinating, though, that all these years ago, if you read the story of one can interpret the story of creation that it's split into days with uh, 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 days that are stagnant and days that are in motion. And sort of the days that are stagnant are reminiscent to me sort of to the black chimney, right? The information is there. And then there's the days that are in motion that really talks about the intentionality. So you have the oceans are built and you have the lands are created, but we don't have, there's nothing moving on them. And then there's other sequences or days where like the oceans have life in them and the land has life in it. And that's letting you know sort of that is, these days are split again to static days and days in motion. And that is really the intentionality that we see we push through into it. Later on, we could extrapolate that into two different modes or models in the world. There's sort of like the Western mode, which is like moving forward, and then there's the Eastern mode, which is more sort of stagnant. And as far as the Dvar Torah, the Torah idea of this is that Judaism is trying to balance both these things by having 6 days of workday of motion, and the one day is actually to create this balance of rest. But going back to our conversation, which is the intentionality, I think the Torah does a very good job trying to really sprinkle the intentionality all over the place with regards to the conversation that ultimately culminates, and I'll end my rant with this, which in the blessings of the Shema, which Jacob alluded to, we first have Yotzer HaMeorot, and that whole blessing is really having a conversation to the agentic, the Arenic God. And we're having the conversation of the luminaries, and that is really the God of the gaps. We then go on to the bracha of Havat Olam, and that is really talking about a deep, personal, loving relationship. So, i.e. the Song of Songs. And we culminate with the Shema, which is now letting people know that the philosopher's God and the agentic God, or God number one and God number two, ultimately need to be seen and understood as one unit. So if people take the time to read their prayer books carefully, they should see that our sages and the last of our prophets did a really good job trying to orient people towards that direction. My rant is concluded.
Let me go back to what I think is an important point I made, and you guys can ignore it a second time and we can move on. Which is there an agent in the world that wants Chazi and Yoav and Yaakov to be Oleh Lechag to Yerushalayim or not?
A posteriori, yes. If I look at the history and my personal history, the history of the Jewish state, the history of the world, the history of life on earth, it all leads to this point in an improbable way. There was no way a priori that will happen.
Almost as if God told Moses to look at his back.
Yeah, but so a posteriori, of course, but my problem with that, all this knowledge doesn't help me to predict what happens tomorrow. That's my problem.
So let me get to the point where, and this is funny, but if you go back to listen to my first conversation with PVK, I brought this up, and for me, it's so there's one line in all of Tanakh, and unfortunately, it's not in the Torah; it's in Sefer Yeshayahu, which for me is the scientific validation of everything, which is Beit Tefillah Yikareh L'chol Ha'amim, right? And we have Sefer Yeshayahu, we have the great Isaiah scroll from 2,200 years ago. And honestly, 100 years ago, somebody who predicted that the Temple Mount could be called the house of prayer for the entirety of the world would already be silly. This is in the 1920s, right? But over 2,300 years ago, let's just date it back to the Isaiah scroll, right? Somebody made this prophecy, which today seems obvious to us, right? I remember when I was in Eretz Israel in the year 2000, 99, 2000, the Dalai Lama came to visit, and he went to the Kotel with his little red kippah, yarmulke, and for the first time, I think ever, the front page of Yated Ne'eman had a picture of the Dalai Lama with the line, Beiti Beit Tefillah Yikare L'chol Ha'amim, right? Front page of Yated Ne'eman. I mean, even the name Yated Ne'eman, right? That Yated Ne'eman means the whatchamacallit, when you
The loyal what do you call it? What you anchor down a tent with?
yeah,
The loyal
anchor a tent down. It's
the loyal anchor.
yeah, like it's like there's my Yated Ne'eman.
I mean, I would ask Yoav, and like you're saying, right? I can't use this iOS to predict the future. I can only see that in retrospect. It seems to be pointing north, so to speak, in this context. I what makes this period so curious, exciting is maybe the wrong word, but I feel like these are worlds that could collide and overlap. The Muslims have this concept of like the last Mahdi, which is like their last prophet, basically, and like his name is Israel, and he speaks Hebrew.
By the
and,
way, that's only 12 Shiites. You've said this before. It's only 12 Shiites who believe this. But go ahead.
I appreciate the correction. Sorry. So to that group, it would be, how wonderful would it be if we end up finding out that like all these messiahs overlap, right? So when Jacob talks about the downfall, or let's say the sin, the Satan's work, which is Zionism, right? And at the same breath, he's also talking about how that tool or that vessel clearly has brought Yoav and Chezi to this country. I would argue that definitely at the state of Israel is right now and where the world is right now, then this is the sort of theological, psychological, ideological flexibility that you want in the world right now, that potentially allows to what I call, let's say, I don't know, Zionism 2.0 or a manifestation of something new, or the Phoenix rising. Jacob could call that the downfall of, let's say, the secular Zionism on the rise of something else. We could all categorize this differently, but either way, I think maybe this is what I'll talk about tomorrow. But we actually end the cycle of the reading on Zot Bracha, and it's quite depressing that Moses doesn't actually make it into the Promised Land, and we have other leaders like that that we ended up not, like, they were almost there, but we ended up feeling like we missed the boat with them. And is that a feature or is that a bug, right? If Moses comes into the land with us, would it be a wrap on the story? And is it really our job, right, to really try to manifest? And you could call this tikkun olam, you could call this different things, but that is really the conversation that I'm most interested in about. And I would argue with Jacob that although I don't have, like Yoav is saying, this iOS doesn't tell me what's next, I feel like exploring what comes next on the ground is the place to be. And like you said, maybe we're too early. I don't want to be too late. And it's a huge sense of responsibility, right? I'm not the leader of a nation, but I feel like these are the moments. These are the times when, again, we have an opportunity, which I hope we don't miss, where the Dod is knocking on the door.
There is a principle in statistics. If you want to predict the future, look at the past. And I mean, it's about prediction the existence of things that are not in themselves consumable. Like if you want to predict the lifetime of a person, well, you know the expected lifetime, so this principle doesn't apply. But if you want to predict the lifetime of something that is not by its nature consumed, let's say if I want to ask, how many more years will there be cars? Then I will say, cars have existed for, let's say, 100 years. So I predict that for the next 100 years, there will be cars. Now, if I form the question differently, for how many years will there be four-wheeled vehicles? And I will say, okay, four-wheeled vehicles have existed for 10,000 years. They will exist for the next 10,000 years further on. That's the principle. So today I visited Mikveh Israel, and that's a place that was founded in Israel in 1880. And it's existing continuously since then. So I'm counting how much time has passed there, let's say over 100 years. I can predict that place will go on for another 100 years. The state of Israel is not young anymore. So I can extrapolate for the same period to the future. That's just pure, that's statistics. That's what, that's the handle that I have.
Taleb calls it the Lindy effect.
Yes, exactly. And Judaism, how much will Judaism prevail? Well, much more.
Yeah, but I would ask, what are your control parameters over here? Because, like, I could say that the last two sovereign periods in Jewish history are around 70 to 80 years, and now, like, you're coming up until, like, you know, you could be like, it made sense for the Jewish nation third time around to survive around 70 to 80 years, but that's it. Right, because this is not, you're saying we're quite old, we're 80 years old, or are we quite old? Like, which pattern are you deciding to identify? Are you identifying the biblical pattern? I mean, that relates back to Jacob's question, right? Like, if after 2,000 plus years you find yourself here, then I would say you're following already the biblical pattern, and at that point we're connecting to Am HaNetzach Lo Mefachad, right? The eternal people are not wary of a long past. That's because, you know, they're not being scientific about it, but if they had you, they would just say, like, that's what we're doing. I'm just looking back 2,000 years, and we're still here.
So, really important question. How long is David's mustache going to last?
It has to do with his play, I'm assuming.
Hey, look, see, Hezi is paying much more attention to the channel than you are, Jacob. That's right. I'm in the importance of being earnest. It's gonna be like a month. It's gonna be a month of this business. Yeah.
That's a long time. Jacob, please know more. Don't you have my blog following his facial hair? Okay, please. It's quite controversial.
As soon as I saw Andrew on here, I knew goys were allowed, so I decided to jump on.
Funny enough, Andrew is living in the middle of the Jewish community in Los Angeles. Like, he is surrounded by more synagogues than there are in the entire city of Toronto.
I don't doubt it.
Gavin Palmer said, I'm an engineer of sorts working with project managers. And then I will put that question. Likewise, I'm an engineer working with project managers. If you look at science in the last since the middle of the 20th century as a project, what will your predictions for the success of that project? All my alarm bells are ringing concerning science as a project. It doesn't seem to be leading anywhere. If Gavin Palmer can help me on that, add his own viewpoint, then I'll be grateful.
Well,
There's Gavin.
yeah.
Hello, Gavin.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
So nice
Yeah.
of you to join.
I mean, to me, engineering and science is a little bit separated. I have more hope in engineering than I do in science.
Well, so this, I feel like it got dropped, and I kind of want to go back to it. Is the God of the gaps? There has been no closing of the gaps for final cause. And so I think that might be even, Gavin, the idea you just introduced about engineering, having hope for engineering, but not for science. Engineering is revolved around.
I wouldn't divorce them.
No, obviously not.
Yeah.
But science feels very comfortable of dropping the why. Or like, sorry, not the why, the final cause why.
Yeah,
'Cause
the
all
final
of-
cause.
Yes, and there's been no development in shrinking that gap. We could talk about all the other gaps.
We spoke about this a little, David, in the Maimonides class, and how the Jewish sages definitely did focus on the five. When you say someone's name, it's Lashem Ma. Like, what is the purpose for this? It's not. It doesn't just
Right.
end with who you are as in, let's say, the epitome of man being just man, but rather man doing what, right? So we very much do focus on that as far as like the Aristotelian, those five causes on the fifth cause. Yeah, but that's a question I feel like many times science doesn't feel comfortable or have the tools necessarily to gauge. And I would say one of those gaps, one of those leaps is for Yoav and I and Jacob, right? Jacob asked a question over here, like, is the mover over here making it so that Yoav and I are here? I would ask someone from the outside, right? I would ask a Christian. When you look at those data points, what do you think?
Right. I mean, a good chunk of this, I believe, was even connected to what I was talking with Jacob about when we were talking about the Feast of Booths. So it's very, very, I think the right place for us to be talking about it is in the middle of that feast, that the Gentiles would be flocking there specifically in relationship to the Messianic age. Like the Gentiles will flock to Israel because of the Messianic age. And they have, and it's because of a very particular Messiah, and I'm very biased.
Sure. I would ask I would ask then Yoav and Gavin, right?
Right.
That when they see data points like the return to the land of Israel, reconstituting the language, and even like participation in TLC, right? Jacob is coming saying like, listen, I don't know what to tell you of. One of my data points are I'm this like lonely Jew walking around and I have like a community of people built around me, Noahides, right? So he's pointing out like, look, this is biblical. Do you, as a scientist, at what point, what is the critical mass where you're like, okay, now I have to start looking at this data and including it into my equation, or I wait again for another 50 years? Like, how much do you wait until you start making assessments?
I'll make assessments. But I look at the technology itself and what it can do. Like there's a potential, like with all this technology, there's the potential, for example, in the very near future to make sure everyone has access to clean water, fruits, vegetables, shelter, education, medicine. It's possible. Like, and maybe it's been possible for 50 years or more, but it's like, it seems like it's becoming increasingly possible. We're moving to we're quickly approaching a point in the future where we'll have that. That's what I look at. I mean, you're mentioning other data points, but I look at technology kind of like Buckminster Fuller looked at technology, and I see just that possibility of that kind of future happening. Do you see that, Yoav?
Two possible good outcomes. First, that we achieve steady state here on Earth. And second is that we escape to the stars. Eric thinks that we are hopeless in here and there's no way we ever, the chance. Every year there's another opportunity for another catastrophe, another unexpected human nature, natural catastrophe, whatever. In the long run, the only safe route is out to the stars, and technology should settle us among the stars. And if it is not doing that, then it has not done its job.
Can we please speak in ancient terms and say heaven and the heavenly hosts that are
I mean, what Eric is talking about is just I mean, from a risk management point of view, it's just simply true. We call it segregation and duplication, right? If you build one building with no fire doors, you're going to have a fire and burn down the entire building. That's why you build fire doors in your buildings. That's why when humanity became global, it has become crazy for us to stay on one planet together, even if it wasn't just the possibility of an asteroid. Now, first, I have to say, ultimately, for me, like I have a whole different frame of it because of my religiosity. At the same time, I see no problem whatsoever with. In fact, I would say Jewish theology would say that we do want to get off this planet. To make the rest of the heavens, as it were, although this is where I disagree with David, right? So, like, the idea that when we mean the kingdom of earth, kingdom of God should be manifest on earth as it is in heaven, for me, that means that on Mars there should also be Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, and there should be humanity, etc.
What I would just, I think we should qualify. First of all, you could take this to a different place down the Graham Hancock lane and be like, the Anunnaki, the heavens is really talking about the stars. They came, there you go, okay, and they came back. Alternatively, Jacob, what you're talking about, I would agree with you that that even sentient life in Alpha Centauri or Proxima B, whatever they call it, it's all good in the hood as long as there's recognition of the master of the universe, even though he could be called in a different name. However, when the Torah was given to man and written in the language of man, aside from the symbols themselves, right? You have to at some point realize that the Torah was given to man. So, for example, if I live in planet X, that's all made out of water. Obviously, even if humans existed there, their relationship and their quote unquote Torah would manifest differently, though, because the reality itself is different. And then you would have to be able to bridge those gaps and see how am I toggling, understanding that this is a similar operating system, though in a different context, right? Like what you're saying works well if like everyone just looks the same and acts the same. But if temperament is different, if people live differently, and I think the Torah, in a certain sense, again, we can map different interpretations about this, but talking about people living for 900 years, 1,000 years, right? These are all things that could be alluding to different times or different frames where the sages experienced the patriarchs experienced one sort of relationship. We are experiencing something else. And when we pray Eloheinu v'Elohe Avotenu, the God of our fathers and our fathers' fathers, is because we recognize that the dynamic has changed since the forefathers to us. There is a through line that we keep to, but I'm not pretending that my relationship with what we know today is not different than it was for Abraham. So even if it's in Mars, I'm not assuming there to be a one-to-one parallel.
You're making a point you often make, which I always wonder why you're bothering with.
Which is?
Yeah, halacha requires that the principles of the Torah be applied to individual situations as those situations are. That's why you have a posek.
Yes, but here specifically, one needs to stress it because you're not talking about just like a different dynamic, which is I'm on a plane or I'm on land. You're talking about potentially a completely different psychology of human. The experience itself of life could be different.
I don't understand how that is qualitatively different and why you always have to make this point when it's obvious that even between when you're poskening a halacha between Chezi and Yoav, it's different psychology, different situation, different. Yes, it is. What?
1 second, but in religion, in humanity, we have, for example, take the concept of greed or jealousy as a given. You could be talking to a species that doesn't experience jealousy or anger.
Same difference.
Okay. You said they would keep the 7.
Constantly looking for an excuse to excuse yourself from the normal halakhic process, which I see no reason for.
It's a very easy excuse. I just need to make a plane, get to Venus, make sure there's a population there, join their population, assuming they'll accept me.
When that happens, we will apply the exact same halakhic process as we apply now.
I wanted to. So Yoav mentioned that with this increase in technology, there's an increased chance of us actually having catastrophe. But it brings to mind a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that we have guided missiles and misguided men. And so simultaneously, while we have this increase in capability for technology, it seems like there's a call for having guided men. So it would be nice if we figured out how to do that as a people so that we can avoid destroying ourselves. So I think that's the point I wanted to make based off what Yoav was saying. And I don't know if it connects in with what Hezi and Jacob were just saying. I apologize if it does not.
In a sense, it does.
Yeah,
I mean, ultimately, the question becomes okay, how do you guide? And that is honestly what we've been talking about the whole time, going back to final cause. Right? The question is, what is the final cause? Why do we have this dining room table? And ultimately, I mean, I think most of us would agree, it's so that we could make Kiddush / Eucharist, whatever you want to call it, and have communion.
Have some pizza?
Sure. Although
I mean,
I think Zach would be very, very upset if communion was made on pizza and Coke.
Jacob, this very quickly leads you to, though, in this final cause, the question of then, right, like, as far as why, right, is this a need of God or not, right? This is the famous controversy Rabbi Manis Friedman finds himself in right now. But is there a need of God or not? Are we created as a source for? Obviously, it's for our betterment, but obviously, this is a loaded topic.
I very much dislike anybody actually giving Yaron Reuven and whatever his name Mizrahi is any sort of credence in what they've been saying. So no, there's no controversy there. There are a couple of
Agree.
YouTube
Sure.
ignoramus who say stupid things, and I don't know why we have to give them any credence, but yeah, that's a whole other thing.
You don't. But my point is to be able to answer these things, and this goes back to what Yoav was saying. Like, even if Yoav wanted to analyze this data, and he's agreed, it's too curious, and this data in front of me is I should start taking it seriously, so to speak, or trying to understand it seriously. Even then, the question would be like, through what are the tools he's using, right? Is he using a Cookian model? Is he using a Zionistic model? Is he what model would you even use to try to look at these texts, right? Because, for example, Jacob, you mentioned, you quoted a text, right? And I could quote a text where all the weddings that we have in Israel every day of the week all are referencing the.
I have an answer. I have a
Okay.
great answer. His
Mhm.
picture is right above me, right there.
The Yanuka. Okay. Well, there you go. Well, he's
You
here.
asked the question. I gave you an answer. Zach's been trying to say something for a while.
Sorry.
Well, I don't know if I've been trying to say something. Well, I jumped on because I heard people talking about quantum physics and it summoned me. It took a 20-minute delay because my sister phoned, so it took a while to actually come. And so I have no idea what actually happened in the meantime. But it makes me immediately want to run in the room and yell stop when anyone starts making philosophical points about quantum mechanics.
I did make I was very, very clear. I was making 0 points whatsoever. And Yoav told us nobody should say anything.
So was I right in saying there is not a soul in the world with whom I can consult as to the philosophy of quantum physics?
That there's no one you can consult?
No one. No teacher, no guru.
No guru might be true. Really, really intelligent people, yes.
So Roger Penrose, yes, no?
I don't actually know what Sir Roger Penrose has written on the subject. I would point to someone like David Albert. I could even point to atheists as well that still have really good ways of thinking through it that are helpful, like Carlo Rovelli.
Why would you point to atheists? If someone is manifestly and obviously wrong in a fundamental and simple way, why would you imagine that he has anything to contribute to the rest of human knowledge?
So someone who is trained to do one thing particularly well. Okay, so I just finished reading Werner Heisenberg's Physics and Philosophy, and Heisenberg is not someone that I would use as a guru for guiding me in life. But when it comes to his thoughts about what do the results of quantum mechanics tell us, what can we say about the mathematical formalism? I trust his judgment more than my own in that field, even though I'm a theist who has some knowledge of quantum mechanics from my
Okay,
physics
so in a nutshell, what has he taught you?
Sorry,
What has he taught you that is a sort of fundamental and interesting that you can teach us now?
the fundamental thing that I'd say, and I'm not a great teacher on quantum mechanics, is that you shouldn't jump straight from what the mathematical formalism tells us about our observations to what that tells us about ontology, because there is a big gap between the epistemological formalism and the ontological reality. And there are a number of ways to catch that out, some of which are incredibly silly, and some of which are less silly. But the ones that aren't silly are still multiple and quite different. And it requires very deep knowledge of the subject to be able to discern between them. So what does it tell us about reality is something we need a good distributed cognition for. And I would suggest looking at even atheist scientists for that. Bean and Deeks would also be good targets. They came up with a perspectival modal interpretation that's quite good in the early noughties. I would avoid anything that starts talking about multiple worlds, because that's all nonsense. But you can look into it if you want.
What about the Marvel franchise? I mean,
you can watch them if it floats your boat. I don't believe it's written by anyone.
I have to say, my gym buddy, Dr. Jackson Pitts, who has a PhD in physics, actually convinced me that the multiple universes idea isn't as silly as I thought it was, because I thought I had just simply disproven it by the concept of conservation of matter and energy. And he's like, well, it's not that simple.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Conservation of matter and energy is something that works within a particular frame. If you change the frame,
yeah. Bruce, who I've been trying to get more involved on my channel for a while, is here. Pastor Bruce, please enlighten us.
Well, my question with I've been listening a little bit on and off, so you have to excuse me if I don't have a lot of background for what you guys are really discussing here. So that it maybe you've answered this already in some degree, but my question is just sort of why. And I guess what that means is these seem like assertions, and really like some version of folklore, not folklore, but I would say like stereotypical consensus or some sort of interpretation that seems to fit popular culture narrative or something like that. I don't really see especially like with regards to what Zach was saying. Nice to meet you, by the way, Zach. They may have assertions that we cannot use science, the objective measuring of scientific studies in the real world, and make some sort of leap from epistemic positions to ontological positions. But my question is why? And to me, that sort of underlies the problem here. You know what I mean? There's a lot more to the origin of the question.
That's why we've been having this discussion. Is the question of why, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Aristotelian. That's how we started, was with the Aristotelian causes. right? And the question, I mean, we went on a tangent of physics, but ultimately the question we started with is okay, can can science tell you why you're here?
Well, not. I mean, not in. It depends on their standard for what they measure from, right? If
It
they don't
depends
believe in
which
creation,
cause.
or if they don't believe in
I-
creationism, there's a automatically we're gonna have that conversation, right?
if you're talking about material and efficient cause, and maybe even formal cause, although I doubt that, but when it comes down to final cause, forget it. There's nothing there.
To be fair to Zach's point, and this is something that Einstein, I believe, was quoted to say about quantum mechanics, which is that it's a very Talmudic science, in that it contradicts itself. There's many different theories, and like you said, it requires one to be extremely well versed in these waters to sort of navigate them. So, Zach, I do
It's
appreciate
worth
what you're.
noting.
Sorry?
It's worth noting that Einstein was famously really did not like the conclusions of quantum mechanics and spent
Sure.
quite a lot of time trying to get out of those conclusions. So it's interesting if he said that. I've never heard that he said that.
My only point being is today I could find 1,000 different people that take a line out of Talmud and use it to use it any which way, and with taking it out of context and taking it out of like many different layers of context. So you are correct that when people are discussing this kind of a science, and this also relates sort of to Eric, I believe Jacob was alluding to or referencing Eric Weinstein, but his whole attack on the science or academia more specifically is that that's great. Everyone now, if you have people online having a casual discussion about quantum mechanics, then maybe the world is ready for the quote unquote leading scientists out there to start having a real conversation with themselves and the public with regards to how to sift through these things, how to understand these things, right? Because you're getting to a point where now you have people that are seemingly educated enough to have these conversations, but ultimately not having the tools to take this conversation further, right? When you jump in and you're like, all right, guys, like let's pull the brakes on like where you're going with this conversation. It's because that is sort of the end, and the expectation is like, well, everyone should just become, let's say, a quantum mechanics. I mean, they have that book Quantum Mechanics, like in 15 minutes or whatever they talk about, but we want a more serious conversation than that, obviously.
Yosef has a book for his daughter that is like quantum mechanics for kids. That's meant for ages 3 to 5, right? And it's like, no. How about we don't do that?
If anyone does want a serious introduction to quantum mechanics that doesn't require knowledge of the maths, there's a book I always recommend. I've probably become a broken record on this. David Albert's Quantum Mechanics and Experience. It's a very good book for introducing philosophers to quantum mechanical problems. It introduces you to the measurement problem and the problems of contextuality and things without going through all the maths beforehand.
But okay, what? See, I don't get this. Look, if you don't know the math or maths, as they say in the colonies, like why are you trying to do quantum physics? Just stay out of it. Like, and this does kind of go back into distributed cognition, right?
No,
we need to be able to talk to each other in such a way that I don't have to, like, I don't have to become a quantum physicist if I have trust, if I have faith, right? And honestly, this goes back to the atheist thing, right? If if I have faith that this other person is faithfully actually doing the work, then I need, and without that, we have no capacity to actually function as human beings in a modern world.
I see your point actually, and I understand. I understand now what you were saying about the atheist quantum physicist, is that why there is a need at the moment for non-physicists to learn quantum mechanics is that very often you get people who know the maths coming to terrible philosophical conclusions, and philosophers having to come in and say, no, that's not how any of this works. That's a logical contradiction. You can't say that. And at the same time, philosophers not understanding quantum physics and therefore making conclusions on it don't work. You've got this bifurcation where at the moment you need both of these streams of academic philosophers and academic physicists to be learning this stuff, because you don't have enough people that are able to integrate them and are actually skilled at both.
It's
Gone is
actually
day of the
really funny.
polymath.
It's really funny to me that Bruce showed up, because Bruce reminded me. So I read Doug Wilson's latest book on the Jews,
Yeah.
American Milk and Honey.
Right.
And he's such a brilliant guy. He really is.
Yeah, he's pretty smart.
And I was like, okay, I'm going to see what he's thinking about Talmud. And he has a whole chapter on the Talmud.
Mm-hmm.
And all of his citations are to somebody like a Presbyterian who in the 80s or 90s wrote a book about the Talmud, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where all of his citations are to, right? And it's like, I understand why Doug Wilson, like, if he wants to know about the Talmud, he's going to go to some Christian who like investigated it, right? And that person obviously, I mean, part of it must have been just the fact that this was before the year 2000. I'm pretty sure the book he's citing was written before the year 2000, because like the information is just so bad. Like, and like, so what do you do with that? Do I expect Doug Wilson to be like, hey, you know what? There's Jacob Federecci. He'll educate me on the Talmud. No, of course not. Because he doesn't trust me. He doesn't have faith in me.
Well,
Now,
I mean,
that's to his
that's a
detriment.
fair point. This is a fair point. It happens often, though, right? So it seems to me like you're talking about Wilson not using primary source, or even, let's say, people closest to the text versus like
How could he? What,
Murray
he's going
or
to learn
Mather.
Hebrew
Well,
and Aramaic and study Talmud for 10 years?
There are, well, I mean, I know my pastor has, but that's pretty rare, right? My pastor owns the entire Talmud as well, like in that giant red collection of 12 books, 20 books, whatever. And he knows whatever it is,
no,
you know what I mean?
you're talking
And many
about
of
the
them, you know.
Cincino. God,
There's a bunch of them.
please.
So
Bruce,
many
do me
of
a
them
favor
do the work
and tell
and learn
him
the
not to
Hebrew,
use the Cincino, please. Please.
Well, give me a reference that he should use.
The Art Scroll is much more expensive. The on Safaria, there's the Steinsaltz for free. The Cincino, please, for the love of God, don't use the Cincino.
Okay, I mean, that's interesting. I'll look at the Steinsaltz version.
Okay.
But I mean, it's a problem though, right? Because you're asking people to do somewhat of a steel man on the position. But the issue there is if you're doing a steel man, but the people you're using to give you the source material have some agenda, right? And I think this is partially why people love science to some degree, because there should be in quality science some non-agenda work, right? So basically presenting facts, doing objective work, and ideally it would stay there. And then people that are knowledgeable in the world of philosophy, religion, and ontology would take that information and use it. But if you go to an atheist who has a worldview, who's interpreting the science for you, they're not primary source either. You're going to have that problem in the same way that Wilson is having this problem using someone like Murray to give him the Presbyterian exposition of Talmudic teaching.
Is
But
that the name of the guy?
I'm sure he used Ian Murray or probably used Mather or some other guys like that, Sproul, Hodge. I'm not entirely sure.
I have his book. I'll pull
Austin.
it up. Yeah.
But yeah, I have it in Kindle as well. But anyway, that's not going to be. I don't know how to avoid that, quite honestly, unless, like you said, we have to do the work in the Aramaic and the Hebrew, and then make an assessment, right? But even
I
then,
don't expect Doug Wilson to become a Talmudic scholar to write one chapter of one of his books.
right. So in that sense, do you dismiss it, or is it useful, or what do you do with that?
I wish that he did have. I mean, and this is part of my whole thing with my engagement with Father Stephen, right?
Stephen DeYoung.
At the very least, I have the capacity. Excuse me. I have the capacity to be like, Father Stephen, like, this X, Y, and Z is wrong, right? But yeah, I thought I owned American Milk and Honey, but I don't seem to own it.
I have it. I mean, I'm assuming. So, for instance, he speaks about
I read it somewhere. And
the glance. Victorians would put it. There's a chapter in it. I'm trying to find that. I'm looking at
there's
all the
a chapter.
Talmud.
There's a chapter where he talks about the Talmud, and then I looked at the, and in
Page
that chapter,
47.
what?
Page 47 on that book.
Yeah, and I looked at, and basically
That's
all of the footnotes were to the same guy.
I'm looking because that's interesting. It's probably Murray, but Gary
And I
North.
went and looked up that guy, and it's like, oh, he was like talking from the 90s, and
Talking about Gary North.
okay,
Yeah. I'm guessing that's what he's looking at. Yeah. He's looking at Gary North, the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Gary
That
North.
book. Yeah, Gary North is he passed away a few years ago. Gary North was a Reformed Presbyterian, really big into the post-millennial eschatology.
Yeah, and look, I
also
don't
an
in
economist as
any
well.
way begrudge him being like, well, obviously I'm going to go to a Presbyterian to learn about this. It's not a weird thing for him to do. It's just
If you want the book that he's referencing, I have that here too. But
What is it?
It's called The Judeo-Christian Tradition, which was published in 1990 by Gary North.
see, and it's like, okay, like,
Now, his primary sources he puts in here somewhere. I'd have to find it, but I'm not sure.
published in 1990. Like, okay, yeah. Guess what? 30 years ago, a Presbyterian had trying to understand the Talmud had like much fewer resources than we do now.
He's using Menachem, George Horowitz, Maimonides, right? Of course.
He's using primary sources, but the primary sources that were available to him were probably the Soncino Talmud. You know,
And the
it's like,
Isidore Tversky from the Code of Maimonides. These are some of the
yeah, but I mean, I'm glad he at least looked into Maimonides, but like, what is available today is just insanely more than what was available in 1990.
Yeah, it also helps that, I mean, you can say what you want about AI, right? But it would at least help people do some of the rigorous, tedious work of translation, maybe to get them started with such a vast amount of material.
Okay, so let me explain the problem.
It, of course, but
let me explain the problem with the Soncino. So here, this is Sepharia, which I highly recommend to everybody. Where did I go? Sepharia. Okay, so if you go to Sepharia, Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, this is the first tractate, right? Okay, so you see how there's the bold text, and then there's the non-bold text. You see all of that?
Yep.
So the bold text is the translation of the words in the Talmud. All the non-bold text is trying to help you understand what it's saying. Okay? Now, you will notice there's way more non-bold text than bold text.
Right.
The Sensino only has the bold text. And it's absolutely incomprehensible.
Without what? Like, how could it be comprehensible? I guess the
Well,
question.
it can't be comprehensible because, like, even I picking up a page of Talmud, like, I have to guess, right? Because the Talmud is like crib notes of a secretary of a debate,
Mhm.
right? It's like they don't even bother like saying the entire verse. Like they'll say a couple of words from a verse of the Bible and expect you to know the whole paragraph.
Well,
Right.
well, Jacob, just to stress, expect you to know the whole paragraph, the context of when it's being said, the context of the two different opinions having the discussion, their schools of thought, where they live. All that has to be assumed and understood already to go on to the next line.
Yeah.
And you have to be part of an ongoing, which is why it's fascinating and very frustrating, an ongoing conversation, right? So if you open up a page, you're being thrusted into a sometimes 1,000, sometimes 100 years old conversation that's going on, and you just have to tap yourself in. The expectations can't be that you're going to read the 10 volumes every time between each page.
Right. That's so when I was in yeshiva, we would spend, no kidding, about 40 hours studying about 2 lines of Talmud a week. And we did that for a year. Right? We got 3, 4, 5 pages of Talmud in a year. Right? Because I mean, when in an actual talk, like in a yeshiva, in a high level yeshiva, if you're at a yeshiva like Chezi was at, you're expected to know, like, obviously, you know the entirety of the Bible before you start talking about, before you start studying Talmud. So when it says, for example, ubacharta b'chaim, right? 2 words, and you shall choose life. Like, obviously, it's talking about Deuteronomy 30, right? And everything in Deuteronomy 30. And you're expected to know that. So it's just like we're having a debate, and one of the rabbis says, ubacharta b'chaim. And you're supposed to import the entirety of Deuteronomy 30 straight into that. And not only the entirety of Deuteronomy 30, but everything that is assumed in the Jewish tradition about what "and you shall choose life" means, which is obviously you break Sabbath rules to boil water for, like, you're having a debate about like something completely different, and suddenly a rabbi says ubacharta b'chaim, and you're supposed to, well, obviously you would boil the water. And if you don't have all of that, you can't understand what's going on. And the Sensino, I mean, it was actually Orthodox Jews who translated it to English. I don't think they were trying to do anything wrong. One of the biggest things I have to clarify for people who try to read the Talmud, especially out of the Sensino, there's a lot of questions that say, is he liable or is he exempt? Right? This is all over the Talmud. Liable or exempt, right? And so if I say he's liable, you would think then that's a sin. And if I say it's exempt, then you would think it's not a sin. Except what's completely understood throughout the entire Talmud is if we're having this discussion, this is prohibited. The question is, how is it prohibited? And does that person have to bring a sacrifice if he did it by mistake? Or is he not allowed to bring a sacrifice if he did it by mistake? So exempt actually means forbidden. And
Jacob, but
yeah,
to Bruce's point, though, I think it's from a certain perspective, it's obviously amazing that your pastor, like you're saying, has done the work and even has a Sensino, right? What Jacob is pointing at is that, and that's why it's great that you're in this space and why Jacob has cultivated his own little corner, but and why the relationship he has with Father Stephen DeYoung is so important, is because Jews have very much have kept to themselves. And obviously, we all know the complicated history we have with our Christian brothers. So I guess as part of the olive branch is an expectation from our Christian brothers and sisters to quote unquote do the work or read or when trying to engage now that it's available. Now you could say like, okay, Chazi, but like that's a heavy toll to ask from someone about the Talmud, where he basically needs to dedicate like half his life right now just to be able to write one paragraph of his book. I would say so. That's not necessarily necessary anymore. You could now have these types of conversations and engagements, like Jacob has been modeling to us in many ways. Some conversations more passionate than others, but either way, I think a live example. And obviously you don't have to you could be comfortable with this or not, but the example stands. If you leave a conversation like this and you talk to your pastor and you're like, pastor, I was talking to Jacob and he said 1 2 3, that is how the next conversation or his next book leads into a conversation where he digs in a little deeper. And that could be said, and this was true, even though traditionally we know that Jews are not supposed to enter churches, according to many opinions. However, even during that time of those decrees, you had sages going and studying with specific monks and priests in order to better understand and have that kind of conversation. Luckily for us, we no longer need to do this under wraps, but we could do this in a brave space where it's actually brought to light. So Jacob, I think you're correct to stress that there's a long way to go, but I think it's fantastic that even Bruce is in a society today or in a community today where like his pastor already has that in his background. And these are baby steps. Shwaya, shwaya.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just like the fact he has a Sensino, obviously that's much better than, for example, so I'm not going to bother pulling it up, but on Twitter, one of these guys was like, yeah, Talmud's like, one of these stupid things. And I'm like, have you actually read the Talmud? Here's a link. And he's like, yeah, I've read it. I'm like, which translation? What did you read? What are you talking about? He's like, yeah, I know it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you want? Like, and he says, fine, let's start with Sofrim 15. Chazi, you want to explain what's wrong with starting with Sofrim 15? You didn't unmute yourself.
We've gone very abstract already. I don't want to leave everyone stranded in the middle of a random tractate.
It's not even in the Talmud. It's not even in the Talmud.
It's not a tractate.
It's a different work that's published at the back of a lot of Talmuds. Now, forget the fact that he was citing something that doesn't exist, even in Sofrim 15. But it's not even in the Talmud. Right? And it's like, here's this guy telling me he knows the Talmud. And I'm like, okay, like, tell me, what's your problem? And he says, and he cites not the Talmud.
I guess, Jacob, you and I would then differ. I, as you often say, maybe I'm too soft-hearted with people like this because I am trying to see them trying, and I don't know how beneficial it is to lambast them in their foolishness. But I understand. Your opinion on the matter.
There's,
I don't
there's a
think that's
point.
someone trying. That's not someone trying. If they're lying about having read the Talmud, they're not trying.
Right, but I would call that, is that lying from ignorance, and is that lying because the amount of noise that's out there? It's like
Yeah, but you reduce the noise by doing what I do, which is making fun of an idiot who says, "I've read the Talmud, Spellcream 15."
I know, but what I would say is there's one thing saying that to that idiot on Speaker's Corner. There's another thing is that any idiot has managed to stumble or get lost or by fate find himself in this little Discord, right? And at that point, the question is like, he's on screen, he's talking to you. Take the opportunity to speak to another soul, manifest and see God's image in him.
You're being way too nice.
There are no bad guys. No.
Apparently, yeah, the guys who were throwing the rockets at you, like,
Yeah, but Jacob, some of that is obviously necessary. Like that's exactly where it's important to stress that, which is I could have an opinion with regards to my security and take into consideration like deterrence calculations. On the other hand, I could still look with complete love and sadness to my Muslim brothers, which this conflict is causing a tremendous amount of pain. Not identify them all as the enemy.
look, you have to be able to differentiate between people who are can be called your Muslim brothers and people that you have to say Haba lahorgaha.
So I'm just trying to understand a little bit here. I mean, just more a broad scope on the issue. Is the claim that people cannot understand this without higher knowledge, interpretation, and those who are qualified to do the interpretation? And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, okay? Because from what I understand, in Islam, Quran's in Arabic, right? You have to say the Shahada in Arabic. If you are Jewish, right, or you're teaching Judaism and Talmudic Judaism, Rabbinic Talmudic Judaism, is there a sense in which you must read this in Hebrew, Aramaic? Is the translation an issue? And then is this sort of a secret knowledge claim or some other version of, because there's an academic, see, you have to understand the context here a little bit for me, because we would claim the word of God is inspired and all those who read it should be able to understand it. The problem that they can't understand it is sin, right? So that would be like one of the more basic, very, very high level basic positions. So this is sort of a separate issue, right?
So first thing I have to say is Talmud is not scripture, and it cannot in any way be compared to scripture.
So you have, so it's not going to be the Torah, Tanakh, Tehillim, all that is. This is not at all. This is like a hadith, right?
Right. It's completely different. It's an argument, okay, about how to read scripture.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a hermeneutical lens by which to use when you read scripture, and this is the discourse.
It's teaching you how to look at different hermeneutics, which are valid ways or invalid ways of looking at scripture.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I seriously mean this. When I read the Gospels for myself, I was shocked at how Talmudic Jesus is, because it was obvious that he is aware of this hermeneutic hundreds of years before the Talmud was written.
Yeah, well, somebody might argue the Talmud is Jesus-like.
Fine.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're products of their time too, right?
Yeah. But however, I would stress that also the Talmud we're learning is not. I mean, you're sort of reading it backwards. It's being written down, sort of by circumstance and not by choice. And that's why you also have a recorded conversation, which is, so you have this conversation Jacob is articulating, but it's sandwiched between historical and philosophical context as well. Right. So this is a conversation that you're also seeing. You're sifting through a live conversation, so to
Yeah,
speak.
this isn't that dissimilar from reading the councils of the early church or writings of the church fathers or things of that nature in Christianity.
It's even different from that. So, like, we study Talmud to learn how to learn. We study Talmud to learn how to learn.
How do you learn how to learn the Talmud?
You actually need somebody to teach you,
Right.
right? And because part of the thing is so for example, the Art Scroll, which, I mean, a set of Art Scroll is about $3,000, goes really in depth here. So let me pull out an Art Scroll.
I would just say, Bruce, while he's getting the Art Scroll, in theory, you start on this journey from the age of 5. I'm saying
Yeah.
the anticipation is you're taking on the Bible at the age of 5, and then the prophets, and once you get to a certain age, you graduate into starting with the Talmud. Once you've filled your belly, so to speak, with the fundamentals, now you're going to learn how to assess them and create like a hierarchy value between these things. There's a joke almost that the Talmud sort of quotes over 90% of the Bible, and like there's these Bible versions which basically only have the quotes that are in the Talmud, so to speak, that like really only these verses, actually these 90% are actually the ones that matter, because through the Talmud lens do we interpret them, right? These other verses sort of like, I have no interpretation for them, so there's no point of sort of discussing them. I
Sounds
reject
extremely
that
familiar.
kind of Bible.
Well, this just sounds really familiar when we read the New Testament. We say the New Testament is quoting the Old Testament all over the place, and this is the way we view the narrative of Scripture from old to new, and how we see Christ in the old. Right? That sounds very similar. Anyway, go ahead, Jacob.
So here's a page of Art Scroll. This page is what a page of Talmud actually looks like, and only the center text is the Talmud itself. All the other text around it is explanations. And you see this line here? So this line is telling you which section of that page this page is trying to explain. Okay? So like, in order to understand, and like all of the notes down here are because they're explaining to you one version of how you can understand that part of the Talmud, because there are multiple ways of understanding each section of Talmud, right? So like, when we study Talmud, we read it at least with these two commentaries, which is Rashi and the Tosafists. Or did I get that?
Is there not competing commentary on the Talmud that creates camps or factions of Jewish people?
Not camps,
Yes,
or
but
factions. We
No,
take all of
camps.
them.
I said
Oh,
camp.
camps?
Like, yeah, different.
Yeah.
denominations
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Well,
And you're allowed to take any interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
So Jacob, I would pause here for a second and just also stress that, for example, in, let's say, the classic yeshiva, I guess, like the seminary where you would study Talmud, the beginning portion of the day is called different organizations do it differently, but generally speaking, you have a portion of the day which is called a Bikiyut, which is cursory, which would be like the page of the Talmud, the main text, and then the two most prominent commentaries. You read both of them. One of them is Rashi, one of them are his grandchildren, which often contradict their grandfather, so you get to see that conversation over there. And then the rest of the day is like the deep dive on that page. So then you could have like 3 weeks just on like 2 verses, which is going then through, let's say, close to like 1,000 years worth of sages. And then sort of having, and then it depends on, sort of who's leading that class and how obscure he wants to take you. He could have you chasing like circles like for months, just like on the words and like an interpretation. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is, like, Talmudic learning is not about a particular hermeneutic, but looking at various hermeneutics, right? And I mean, again, so this was one of my major differentiations between Paul and Jesus. Jesus seems obviously steeped in all of that. Paul doesn't seem to know any of that.
Comment. Maybe this is our answer to the problem of quantum mechanics. That we have to start a similar discussion. Should be a book that describes sort of experiment by experiment as the kind of the scripture that you cannot argue with. And then you have somebody's interpretation on the left and somebody's interpretation on the right, and an interpretation to the interpretation. This maybe over the course of the next 1,000 years, we might get to a better understanding of quantum mechanics.
I actually 100% agree with that.
That's exactly what David Albert's quantum mechanics and experience tries to do. Tries to lay out the experiments and be the Bible for that, right? And then
we've solved
give
it.
you the tools to then go beyond it.
Yeah.
The Talmud is the answer to the world's problems, right, Bruce?
I'm out.
I'd want to.
Well, the thing that oh, go ahead, Zach. I'm sorry.
So I'd want to say something actually to push back on Bruce. You keep wanting to say like, oh no, Christians have this too. We have this sounds like this Christian thing that we do. And
Well, I'm just making a parallel example, yeah, to try and
yeah, I don't think it parallels in the Christian tradition. So especially
depends
when
what you mean by it,
read,
which
I mean the Christian tradition. Like if you read the Church Fathers,
yep,
you don't get the same sense that that's what they're trying to do. That they're not trying to be Talmudic scholars. They're trying to teach with rhetoric and philosophical argumentation for a wide audience. There's a different thing going on. They're
sometimes
not drilling down into a verse for 50 pages. Sometimes they do.
they are. Chrysostom wrote a lot
Spin it
of
out
commentary, right?
into a sermon, basically.
Yeah, they are sermons, but they're massive amounts of commentary, and also there's there's like, so it depends on who you read, but there are epistles written, right? And then there are like sort of more narrative form, and then there's like argumentation, the council's reference. So I mean, I don't know. A lot of it is quite deep, in depth on one or two particular verses of scripture that they have, and others is more philosophical, church liturgical, acts or rites.
So I'll tell you a difference that's been very important to me. I would say Rashi's commentary and the various commentaries on the Torah are far more close to a comparable thing to the Church Fathers.
Yeah.
And
I
highly recommend. What?
That's exactly the point I was about to make. That when you look at the later commentaries, that's what looks like the Church Fathers. Yeah.
Yeah. And I highly recommend every Christian actually take a look at Rashi. But the one thing I love about Rashi is every few pages he will comment on a verse. I don't know what that means. And
you will find the same thing in St. Augustine.
It's
all over the Church Fathers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I have not. And Augustine is the last one I would expect something like that from, because frankly, he says all of the stupidest things.
Well, I would wonder, and Bruce, you could let me know about this, or Zach. Not only does Rashi say I don't know, but there's something that's very common in commentaries to say is tzarich iyun. This requires deeper analysis, and they leave it at that point. Basically, I wonder if is there something like that in the Church Fathers, that like this requires just deeper analysis.
I don't think it would be
I've
put
got-
that way.
So in
Go ahead.
someone like, I'll keep using Saint Augustine. There are points where he reaches something and says, this could mean a whole bunch of different things. I'm not going to litigate that here. This is a matter for further analysis by someone else. So it's not the same words, but I suppose that's the kind of idea, that he'll have something where, like, I don't know, someone else figure it out. Someone wiser than me can do this later.
There's spots where they'll give you like multiple spots, multiple points for one particular argument in scripture, right? So they'll say, this is the context we have, this is what it could mean, not entirely sure it means that, but this is how I'm going to apply it. And then other people will just not address it at all. And in more modern commentary, you'll see like 5 interpretation options for, the scripture. But in Augustine, I'm trying to remember where this is. Maybe it's in. Anyway, basically he says, I don't know if I can do this without someone else, something like that. I don't remember now. I'd have to find the quote again. It's like City of God, or anyway, it's been a while. But I don't know if it's saying the same thing as that. But there are spots where people will admit that they don't have all of the particular details or an opinion on this.
I have to leave in 3 minutes. Chazi, I don't know if you can continue this. You can't. Okay.
Sorry.
One thing I will kind of leave us with, and I think Bruce will appreciate that. One of my favorite scenes in the Talmud is they're having an argument about a chicken, right? And how far away it is for something. And Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, what if 1 foot of the chicken is inside the line and 1 foot is outside the line? And they threw him out of the study hall because they're like, okay, you're just stop it, right? Like, that is quintessential, like, that is part of Talmudic study. It's not script. We are not discussing scripture here, right? We're talking about people having arguments, and at one point somebody says, "Is what if 1 foot the chicken has 1 foot out?" And everybody's like, "Go away." Right?
Yeah, Jacob. But at the same time, the sages that are participating in these conversations, right, are arguing whether or not the shape of the letter itself is something that's worth being interpreted, and that has ramifications to it. But I think, like PVK uses "let's land the plane," you should start adapting right now. This requires further tzarachin. This requires deeper analysis. And that's how you end conversations that get difficult. They just require deeper analysis.
Tell you what, I will go ahead and end with my famous ending. I'm going to use host's prerogative to put the Reverend Parcells to bed, because he does need to get up in the morning.
Sorry, Reverend. Thank you.
But before he goes, I have a question. Let's say, God forbid, that I were to burn somebody at the stake for not being a Trinitarian, and I did not repent of that. Is that a salvation issue?
Sometimes Jacob takes
There's a
that devil's
proverb.
advocate thing too
Isn't there
far.
a proverb that says something like "Don't answer a fool according to his folly."
But there's a proverb that says, "Answer a fool according to his folly."
There is. Exactly right. And I'm going to leave it to you guys to determine, which of those was applicable in this situation as I go. So, but anyhow, good.
Thank
it was
you,
good
Reverend.
to
Thank
chat
you.
with you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
The